Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earliest crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. First of all, I'm going to apologize for my video. I had to do a lot of color editing and it feels very blown out, but because of the way I'm coloring, that was the only way you could see what I was coloring. That's a lot of coloring in one sentence. I am using the Honeybee Stamps Pine and Berry Centerpiece Stamp Set. This is one of Kelly Taylor's illustrations. I am going to color in colored pencils today, and I'm using pieces, but not the lantern this time. I want to make a centerpiece that has the candles. I want to color the candles white. I want to put some holly around it. I want to put the pine swags around it. We're going to use some pattern paper. We're going to use some stickles. We're going to use some bits and bobs from my stash. I'm using a Honeybee Stamps die. I'm using some Honeybee Stamps shaker bits. It's a Honeybee Stamps hour today. Which is okay because I love their products. Anyway, we're going to do a little bit of layering, which means I'm using some masking paper as well. And so right now I'm just stacking the stamps in the order I want to see them on my card, and then I will stamp them from the top down, masking them as I go. I am stamping them in Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. I am coloring with my Prismacolor pencils today. With colored pencils, I use as many pencils I need to get the shade variation that I want, from the shadows to the highlights. And because I'm coloring the candles white, I'm only coloring in the shadows on the candles, which takes more time than coloring in the whole rest of the card. So now that we've talked coloring, let's go ahead and talk about our crime. Our journey today takes us to the state of Illinois. Now, Illinois became the 21st state to enter the Union on December 3rd, 1818. The area that became Illinois was discovered in 1673 by explorer Louis Jolliet and a Jesuit father, Jacques Marquette. And they discovered this, or they named this area, as they floated down the Mississippi River and returned up the Illinois River and then crossed into Lake Michigan, which is kind of where Chicago now is. Illinois is famous for many things, including being the state with the most giant things, including, but not limited to, a massive rocking chair, a mailbox as big as a building, a 56-foot wind chime, the world's largest golf tee and driver, a gigantic pencil, a giant bird cage, and the world's largest ketchup bottle. Illinois is home to the largest collection of 8-track tapes, as in Guinness World Record holding collection. Twinkies were invented in the suburban town of River Forest. And a nod to the weird, roosters must be 300 feet away from a door or a window before they can crow. And it is normal in the town of Normal to make funny faces at dogs. And in Illinois, the Great Depression gave way to the kidnapping of Mary Agnes. As I just mentioned, our story takes place in the early years of the Great Depression in Chicago, Illinois. Like the rest of the country, Chicago was hit hard. The industrial parts and plants were not operational, some of them, and the ones that were operating on a bare-bone crew. Day laborers didn't have work because people didn't have funds to pay them. Mom and pop shops closed because nobody could afford to purchase the things that they sold. It was just a hard time to live. Michael Joseph Maroney was born on September 3rd of 1899 in Limerick, Ireland. And Ireland at this point in time was barely surviving one famine from another, political strife, religious strife, lack of jobs for laborers, and the United States was the great hope of many of these farmers and laborers that were just not being able to make a living anymore in Ireland. So many Irish families immigrated to the United States hoping to find good farmland and good jobs to support their families. At some point, Michael became one of those immigrants. Now, I could not find the year he immigrated. I found a naturalization card, I found a birth certificate, I found a draft card, I found his son's draft card, but I couldn't actually find an immigration record for Michael. So, at some point in time, Michael immigrated to the United States, and it seems like maybe without his parents. Catherine Rooney was born on June 23rd, 1912 in Cook County, Illinois. And her parents are Joseph Edward and Marie Jeanette Rooney. I could not find much information on Catherine and her family either. There's just not a lot to find in some of these records from that time period. However, what I did find was that on April 15th of 1928, Catherine and Michael were married. And in case you're bad at quick math, Michael was about 29 and Catherine was 15. So, we're just going to put that there and walk away. They would eventually go on to have 8 children, 5 sons and 3 daughters. The next time we hear about Michael and Catherine is in the beginning of the years of the Great Depression in 1930. They were living in Chicago with their 2 oldest daughters, Mary Agnes, who was born in Chicago on May 10th, 1928, and Anastasia Faye, who was also born in Chicago on May 3rd of 1929. Catherine was then about 7 months pregnant with their 3rd child, who was also, because I know later, a girl, was also a girl. Now, Chicago in the 1930s was not a prosperous place to live, and Michael was earning a very sparse wage of $15 a week, handing out handbills. Handbills were printed advertisements for things being sold in the area or shows that were happening in the area. And $15 a week, even then, was not enough money for a family of 4, almost 5. During the Depression, a lot of social welfare agencies were set up by the government and churches and other social charities in an attempt to help needy families. And one thing that was common was for ads to be placed looking for work or financial help or just general help for these families. Now, because the Maroney family was destitute, a relative of Catherine's placed an ad in a newspaper social service column asking for that type of financial assistance for Michael and Catherine. That was not uncommon. The hope was that someone needing a laborer or a farmhand would see the ad and then respond. What was uncommon was that the family's address for Michael and Catherine was accidentally printed in the ad. Normally, the address of the family would be withheld, and those who had the ability or the desire to help would contact the newspaper or the social agency who had placed the ad, and they would link them up with the family. On May 14th, 1930, the day after the ad ran in the paper, Catherine was busy about her housework, scrubbing the floors of their small flat when there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, there was a woman there who introduced herself as Julia Otis and claimed to be from a welfare agency and wanted to help. Julia brought groceries, which, food, I'm taking that, right? Anyway, Julia brought groceries and stated that a social worker named Mrs. Henderson had seen their ad and sent her to help. She had a rather unusual method or plan to help. Her idea was that she would take 2-year-old Mary Agnes with her on a trip to California and then return the child after the family got back on their feet. Obviously, Catherine turned down that idea, and Julia said, okay, and she would come back the next day. Now, to me, this is a giant bag of red flags falling from the sky, and obviously Catherine had some worry about it because she was like, yeah, no, you're not taking my child. However, the next day, Julia returned and Catherine opened the door for her. Julia came back with new clothes for the baby, the unborn baby, and she said she had made arrangements for Michael to have a better job. And then Julia asked if she could take Mary Agnes shopping for clothes. Catherine consented. So at some point, Julia has made Catherine comfortable with her. Julia left the home with Mary Agnes, and neither of them were ever seen again. Like never. Kind of. The following day, Michael and Catherine received a letter that read, quote, "Please don't be alarmed. I have taken your little girl to California with me. I have hired a special nurse to care for her. We'll be back in 2 months. By that time, you will be on your feet again and will be able to care for her. She didn't even cry a bit. She is outfitted like a princess. In the meantime, I'll help all I can to get you on your feet. Don't worry about her or anything else. When you get this letter, we will already be on our way. As ever, Julia Otis." The letter was written on stationery that was traced to a Chicago store. So Julia literally wrote the letter in the stationery store, probably the day she took Mary Agnes shopping. Because on the day that Mary Agnes disappeared, women shopping in the store remembered seeing a woman who matched Julia's description with Mary Agnes, and Julia was dictating the letter to a female store employee. A few days later, Michael and Catherine received another letter from a woman named Alice Henderson. Remember that name, Henderson, Mrs. Henderson, the social worker? She claimed she was Julia's cousin and that Julia had lost her child and her husband the year before and was desperate for someone to love. Alice, or the woman who said she was Alice, seemed certain that Julia would come to her senses and return Mary Agnes. But this letter was the last time the Maronis ever heard from Julia or Alice again. Authorities conducted an extensive search for Mary Agnes and the two women. However, they were never able to locate anyone with the names Julia Otis or Alice Henderson who could have been involved in the kidnapping. Reportedly, the authorities also determined that the two letters that Michael and Catherine received were most likely written by the same person. During the investigation, Mary Agnes was described as a blue-eyed, blonde-haired girl who was left-handed and had two identifying marks, a strawberry birthmark on her face and a surgical scar. Another thing that seems to be missing from the reports of Agnes's disappearance was a physical description of Julia Otis. One report or one story, one writing of this story that I read, gave what was Julia's description of her clothing, but I didn't find an actual link to that description, so I did not relate that here. But what I did not ever read in any of the accounts was a physical description of Julia by Catherine. And I'm sure that she told somebody what the woman looked like, right? She had to have, right? She had to have, right? I mean, that's just the paranoid mom in me, but she had to have told somebody what Julia looked like. Now, the next summer, July of 1931, there was a Native American woman named Martha Thompson who was pushing a cart in an attempt to join a circus. And I'm not sure, I did not research what that meant, but she was trying to become part of the circus. Inside the cart was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed 3-year-old girl that matched Mary Agnes's description. Martha maintained, when questioned by authorities, that the girl had been abandoned by her mother, a woman named Florence Fuller, that Martha was familiar with, like knew personally, and she begged to be allowed to keep the child. Michael and Catherine were called in to look at the girl, and they did not identify her as Mary Agnes. So she did not have, she was not familiar. She did not look like, it's only been a year, but she did not look like what Michael and Catherine assumed Mary Agnes would look like a year later. We are going to jump ahead to 1952. So that is almost 21 years. and we're going to go to San Pablo, California. A woman named Mary McClellan, she was a 24-year-old housewife and mother, came forward to investigators and police saying she believed she might be Mary Agnes Maroney. Her husband had seen an article about Mary Agnes's disappearance in a newspaper, and that article contained photograph of Mary Agnes's siblings, and he thought that his wife, Mary, resembled Michael and Catherine's children. Mary McClellan, this Mary, had been adopted in 1930 by a couple named Charles and Nora Beck. So this information led to a series of experts being called in to examine Mary McClellan, and they seemed to come to the conclusion that she was, in fact, Mary Agnes Maroney. It appeared that she had similar teeth, blood type, skull-shaped fingerprints, and handprints to Michael and Catherine's other children. However, the one discrepancy was that Mary Agnes had had a surgery. She had an operation on a ruptured navel. So she had a navel hernia, and that left her with a scar because she had to have it surgically corrected. Mary from California, Mary McClellan, did not have that surgical scar near her belly button. And there was a doctor in California who came forward and said that he actually had delivered Mary McClellan in November of 1927, a year before Mary Agnes was born, and he had been the one who had placed her with the Becks shortly after her birth, but he did not have any paper documentation to that effect. So with the general consensus that Mary McClellan was in fact Mary Agnes, she had a reunion with Mary Agnes's younger siblings, and they accepted that she was most likely their long-lost sister. They also acknowledged they would never be 100% sure, and they would never know all the details of Mary Agnes's disappearance. Now, Mary McClellan passed away in 2005, and Mary Agnes's surviving relatives, so her children's children, arranged to have her DNA compared to Michael and Catherine's family members. There was no genetic match, meaning Mary McClellan was not Mary Agnes, whose fate is now, again, unknown. Michael died in 1957 at the age of 55. His final words were said to be, quote, "They never found my baby girl." Catherine died in 1962 at the age of 49, and Mary Beck McClellan died in 2005 at the age of 77. Mary Agnes's kidnapper was never identified. There were never any clues indicated where she was taken or what had happened to her, whether she lived or died. And this is the thing that got my attention for this story. This year, 2023, in February, it was announced that DNA testing had determined a link between Mary Agnes's surviving family, so her siblings, children, and grandchildren, and relatives of a Florida resident who died in 2003 at the age of 75, a woman named Jeanette Burchard? Okay, I'm going to call it that. Jeanette's daughter, a woman named Terry Arnold, said she had suspicions about her grandmother, Jeanette Anderson, of being a kidnapper. And whoa. So basically what I read was that Mary Agnes's siblings' children could not ever get over the fact that nobody knew what happened to Mary Agnes, especially after it was proven that Mary McClellan could not have been Mary Agnes. And so they conducted their own kind of investigation with the help of authorities, and there was this DNA match. Now, the story that I read, Terry did not say why she suspected her grandmother, Jeanette, was a kidnapper, but what she did say is that once her mother was identified as having a genetic match to Mary Agnes's family. She was angry at her grandmother for taking Mary Agnes away from her family. So Jeanette, aka Mary Agnes, was raised as an only child. She was married twice. She had 3 children and spent more than 50 years as a nurse. Jeanette's children and grandchildren told the newspapers in Chicago that they loved her and she loved them. She was always there for them. Her grandchildren thought fondly of her, but they also acknowledged that their gain was at the horrible loss of Mary Agnes's parents. So, holy cow, wow. So I fully intend to track down the newspaper articles from both Florida and Chicago and read more about Mary Agnes's adult children and grandchildren's account of how it came to be known. I just was kind of running out of time to get that information into our video today. But that's definitely the thing that attracted me to the story, was that here we are almost 100 years later, like 97 years later, and Mary Agnes has been found. Now, unfortunately, it was long after her parents passed away, and she had passed away, so she did not get to have that reunion with her siblings, but she was found. So the interesting thing is that Jeanette, aka Mary Agnes, her daughter, kind of was not surprised when she found out that her mother was a kidnapped child. And I can't wait to find more about that. But something about her grandmother must have rubbed her the wrong way. On the contrary, Mary Agnes, Jeanette's children and grandchildren all say what a wonderful woman she was, how she was kind and loving, and how easy it was for her to love them. So she must have been raised in love, right? It was easy for her to love her children and her grandchildren and to be there for them and to support them. And so we have an technically unsolved, but just recently solved case that has a happy-ish ending, even though Michael and Catherine never got to see their daughter again. It still has a happy ending. But if I had done this story last year, it wouldn't have had a happy ending yet. So, oh my gosh, that was so exciting to me. I was like digging around looking for a story, and I was trying to avoid like mobster stories because, Chicago and Illinois and it's mobsters. And I was trying to avoid that kind of a story because I don't like to give them more notoriety than they already have. But then I stumbled across this update. I'm like, wait a minute. What? It was like mind-blowing that here we are in 2023. Mary Agnes disappeared in 1930. So we're like 93 years after her disappearance, and her mystery has been solved. Or at least part of her mystery has been solved. And I would suppose, and again, this is without having read any of the supporting documents, I would suppose that the woman who took Mary Agnes probably had lost something or did not have, whether or not she was married and lost a husband and child, or was never married and lost whatever. She obviously wanted somebody to love because she raised this girl into a wonderful human being, it sounds like. She worked as a nurse for 50 years. That's a substantial amount of time to work as a nurse. So, yay for happy endings, even if it takes a long time to get to them, and even if the people who were originally hurt maybe didn't get to have that ending. So here is a close-up of the card. I know the color's kind of blown out. It's just a weird video day in my craft room. I'm not sure what that's all about. I got to figure out what's going on with my camera settings. But yeah, coloring white candles on white paper was really hard to get the camera to focus on. This is a picture that I found of Mary Agnes as a child. The next picture is a picture of Jeanette. The only thing that's different is her hair isn't blonde anymore. And I mean, mine isn't as light as it was when I was a child either. So there you go. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed our story. I have a couple of other videos here I think you would like. I have also added that subscribe button. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you did. Give me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below. How do you feel about this one? And I hope you have a really fabulous day.